Clifton,
Yes.
the most famous revitalizer. No, I'm not talking to you. I'm describing you.
Oh.
The most famous revitalizer in the 20th and 21st century is on the show, and we've been talking about leading church revitalization, even when you don't feel like you're a leader. First episode is why some leaders don't think they're leaders. Second episode, some of the more common obstacles in leadership. And this part 3, which will wrap it up, is 5 key leadership traits of effective church revitalizers. And that word effective is going to need a little bit of clarification, because one person's effective. It's kind of like leader. What's a leader? What is effective? So we're going to talk about those. In the last episode, part 2, we talked about the transition that we are making, where Revitalize and Replant will be moving. And this, where you are right now, will become the Church Answers podcast. But Mark talked to us about this bittersweet, non-acrimonious, total friendship change that we're making.
I know. Thom and I, we're like the Earth, Wind, and Fiber tour, but we're going to have to break. Didn't they break up? Did Earth, Wind, and Fire break up? I'm not sure. I have
One Earth, Wind, and Fire, primarily the 70s.
It was. Three Dog Night was the 60s. That was the 60s.
60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And anyway, you know what they said? Wait. What? No, I got to. You know what I feel like when we talk about Three Dog Night?
What?
1 is the loneliest number that you'll ever know. I'm on. Some people are so confused about what we're saying. They are. How can people be so heartless? How can people be so cruel? Easy.
Anyway, we are making a change, not because, we don't really want to, because we love each other. Thom and I have I've said in the previous podcast, and I mean it. The best thing about this podcast, we've been doing this since the early 1960s. The best thing about this podcast.
Yes. Before there were podcasts, we were podcasting.
That's right. Is my relationship with you. I really enjoyed it. We've become very close, real friends. People understand that. They pick it up. They can sense that we have deep love and affection for each other and respect for each other. And we really do. But podcasts are always changing and evolving. That's the world we live in. And we want to make everything better for the listeners, not just for us, so that we can just enjoy ourselves more. And so what we think will be the best listener experience will be for us to have really 2 podcasts, where we've had one before. And so we're going to take Revitalize and Replant, and we're going to move off and do our own thing over here. And what we're going to do is focus entirely on revitalizing and replanting. And it'll be myself along with a good friend of mine named Dan Hurst. And Dan, he's been a pastor. He grew up as a son of international missionaries in Honduras. He and I have known each other all of our lives. Really, our dads were roommates in college. We've grown up together. We went to college together. We started some business together. We started some churches together. We've had a great time. And we've been in radio together. He was a DJ on one radio station in Kansas City. At the same time, I was a DJ on another radio station. And he was the number 1 DJ in Kansas City. I was on a 250-watt daytime only AM, so it wasn't even the same thing. But anyway, we had all of that to simply say it's been kind of a lifelong desire for us to do something together. So Dan will be with me, and we'll have special guests. Usually it'll be Mark Halleck. And those of you in the replant world, you know Mark. He's written some amazing books on replanting. He went to the Calvary Church in Inglewood, Colorado, had 30 people there about 14 years ago. Today they have 800. And more importantly, though, they've adopted and replanted about 30 churches in the Mountain States. And he raises up a whole cadre of replanters every year and sends them out. So really it's going to be the 3 of us, Mark Halleck, Dan Hurst, and myself. Revitalizeandreplant.com. So here's the deal, Thom. Even though it doesn't start until the 1st of April, if you go to revitalizeandreplant.com right now, you can listen to the pilot episode. Again, be kind. It's the first episode, right? It'll get better, I promise. But take a listen to the pilot episode and then subscribe, because if you don't subscribe, every time you subscribe, an angel gets his wings. So go ahead and subscribe to that pilot episode. And how that works? I think it is. Anyway, subscribe to the pilot episode so you can be on our subscriber list. And then when we start 2 a week. We're going to do 2 a week because we got nothing else to do. We're going to do 2 a week beginning in April, and we're looking forward to a great time of this new podcast, Revitalize and Replant. And Thom will be a guest from time to time because we love him, and we're going to do that, and we're going to stay close in a relationship. But that's our new podcast. It starts. It's like a spinoff, right? Remember back in the days when the Jeffersons spun off and Maude spun off, and what did Laverne and Shirley? Didn't they spin off of something? Oh, Mark and Mindy.
They spun off. Well, they spun off from Happy Days first.
Happy Days, right? That's right. They spun off from Happy Days.
Kind of the mother television show of so many others that came around.
That's right. And Mork and Mindy spun off of Happy Days. I remember that. Because
I didn't remember that.
Yeah, Mork showed up on that. So this is like a spinoff.
Nanu, Shazbot. That's something.
Nanu. So this is a spinoff. So Revitalize and Replant right now, just as soon as this podcast is over or while you're listening, go to revitalizeandreplant.com and hit subscribe, and you'll be one of the cool kids. You can then sit at the cool kids table at lunch if you do that. I promise.
And if you're a subscriber here, you will become a subscriber of the Church Answers podcast. So you need to take an action to go to Revitalize and Replant. You don't have to do anything. You stay here for the Church Answers podcast. We both launch fully in April, but Mark has a pilot. So go listen to the pilot or YouTube it and watch it, whatever the case may be.
Whatever.
I love it, but I don't like it. Okay, that's the mixed emotions I have. Just to be clear,
I know I'm going to miss being with you. I mean, I enjoy hanging out with you. I really do. We have a good time, and it's been an important part of my life. But this will be good.
Nearly 300 episodes.
Nearly 300 episodes.
One time a week. And I know on many occasions you say, can't we do 2 a week? I can't do 2. Now Mark's going to be able to do 2
I can do 2 a week.
Yes, you can do 2. And one of the reasons I can't do 2 a week because I'm doing that other podcast is now Church Answers podcast. So Mark, North American Mission Board, Revitalize and Replant. Go to revitalizeandreplant.com to sign up there. Okay, Mark, we're going to wrap up this 3-part series on leading a church revitalization, even when you don't feel like you are a leader. Once again, if you have not heard part 1, why some church revitalization leaders don't think that they are leaders, do so. Then go to part 2. And once again, let me just tell you to go to part 2 and listen to the end of this one. Listen to it all, but listen to Mark's testimony about his relationship with his dad. Incredible. That was called 4 Common Leadership Obstacles in Church Revitalization. Part 3, I hope we offer some solutions in a very godly way, not just in some type of secular way. 5 key leadership traits of effective church revitalizers. And so the first one is they were Acts 6:4 leaders. And basically, Mark, that just means that these revitalizers who have withstood the test of time. They may not have the biggest churches. They may not be known at all. It's beyond their own church, but they stood the test of time. And they're Acts 6:4. What is Acts 6:4? We're going to give ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word. How many times have we said that?
Yeah. How many times have we really made that happen? You know, most of the time we end up giving ourselves to everything else except that, because the adversary knows how important that is to the true success of the work. Thom, I say it all the time, and I believe it with all of my heart. Only eternity will reveal the true results of your labor. You're not going to know that this side of heaven. You may have only, in terms of size of congregation and comparing yourself to other churches, although in our group of Southern Baptists, the median size church is 67. So if you have 67 on Sunday morning, you're like half of all Southern Baptist churches. But you may compare yourself to other churches and feel like you just, what have I done with my life? I never had 100 people ever in a church service. But you have no idea how God has used you through all those years and all your faithfulness in a way that when you get to heaven, you're going to be absolutely blown away by what God did with what you did, how faithful you are, and then how great of a God he is. And so, I mean, I don't want to be overly simplistic here, but I'm sure whoever packed that little boy's lunch that day he took off with the loaves and the fishes had no idea it would end up feeding thousands of people. And I think sometimes we just don't realize how big of influence we'll have if we'll remain faithful with these small things. So one of the things I do every day in my ministry is just encourage guys to be happy, be where you are, be faithful with these small things, because nothing is small when it's part of God's work. Absolutely nothing. There is no small church. There is no small ministry. It's all important. It all matters.
And if you are in prayer faithfully, if you are in the Word faithfully, you're already successful, because
Absolutely.
your source of success is God, His Spirit working through you. If you're not, you're already not successful. I'm not going to call you a failure. I'm just going to say true success comes by spending diligent time in prayer and in His Word. I'm going to ask Alana to put this in the show notes, but I wrote a podcast. I wrote a blog article about how I struggle with my own prayer life. I wrote it a few weeks ago from this podcast, and I basically talked about how I have a perfunctory prayer life at times. An example is I'll say I'm praying for you, man, and I don't.
Right.
I mean, I've been a liar on too many occasions, so I wrote about that. And I hope it hadn't taken me 67 years of life to remember how important prayer is, but I have increasingly learned the importance of prayer. That's certainly a case in revitalization. Mark, we also say revitalization leaders are dealing with change. If you deal with change, you're going to be subject to criticism. You're going to receive criticism, and they learn how to deal with it in a healthy manner. It doesn't mean that they like it. It doesn't mean that it feels good and that it can just go off of them, but it does mean they have to deal with it in a healthy manner. You've talked to more than one occasion about the fact that that's something that you have had to deal with over the years.
Yeah, it is. And we have about 16 characteristics we see God using in the lives of men, we being the team that I lead at the North American Mission Board. We've discovered about 16 characteristics, not about, but 16 characteristics that God has used in the lives of men. And one of them is these men have what we call pastoral grit. We used to say, I called it an ability to endure pain. But the guys on my team said, you can endure pain and no change come in that church at all. You can just be in a state of pain for 20 years and nothing good happens. But if you have pastoral grit, you work through the pain to get to where you need to go. And so I think in leading change, you have to have a certain amount of pastoral grit, a certain amount of able to endure pain, endure discomfort, endure people saying bad things about you, enduring losing some folks in your church, enduring all kinds of difficulties. But you're not going to quit doing what God's called you to do. You're not going to change course. You're not going to give in to the pain. You're going to battle through it, and you're going to see victory in the end. You're going to have pastoral grit. And you have to have that in a change situation, or you will cave, and either you'll tap out and you'll go to another church, or you'll just tap out and you'll just give up and you'll let them lead it and you'll just be their chaplain. One or the other will happen.
Good word, Mark. Good word. Many of these leaders, if not most, if not all of them, that we would view as those who have done well. Again, we're not using the word successful because of the connotations that it has, but they've done well. They've withstood the test of time, and eternity has been touched by their work, positively touched by their work. And we say this one, they were mentored or in a peer group or both, whether it's formal or informal. They didn't think they had all the answers. They got answers from others. You and I have talked to each other in times when we have struggled. We've had an informal mentoring peer relationship. It can be formal or informal, but you're not too prideful to say, I need help.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience at leading a team. I've always been sort of a apostolic, as we talked about before, not in that. I'm not an apostle. I don't mean that, but in the first years of my
went
ministry,
from place to place to place, like catalytic.
I went from place to place to place, started a church, and then passed it off to a founding pastor. So in that sense, I kind of worked alone. I didn't have anybody really ongoing on a team, even didn't have a staff. So here I end up at the North American Mission Board, and this ministry grows and grows, and now we have rural ministry, and we have bivocational ministry, and we have revitalization and replanting. And I have a relatively significant sized team. So I'm leading a team. Well, I'm getting up in years, and this is kind of new to me. So there have been times when I would reach out to Dr. Rayner, to Thom. I would text him and I would say, here's an issue I'm having, and and he would get right back to me and really coach me through and just-in-time training on how to deal with that, learning from his leadership skills, helping me. I say all that to say there are times I really needed to lean into him. There's another man I've leaned into, and I'll name him Al Gilbert, who was my first
Love Al
boss.
Gilbert.
Yeah, Al's a great guy. And to this day, I'll call Al up and I'll say, Al, man, how do I deal with this on a team? Am I doing this right? And the thing I like about you and Al is I trust you and I love you, and you'll tell me if I'm a knucklehead. I mean, you really will. You'll say, no, that's a very stupid way to do that, Clifton, and you need to do it some other way. You got to have that collaboration. You've got to be able to have other people around you that can help feed into you and help you never quit growing as a leader. And as God gives you more responsibility, listen to this, he'll bring people in your lives to help you do that. We're always to be in a plurality of leaders, a plurality of relationships that God uses to empower us and strengthen us and grow us. Even in the New Testament, they would come together. And remember the Jerusalem Council where they talked about these things and they had some disagreements and they all came to. We have to be able to have one another and talk to one another and learn from each other and let the Holy Spirit speak through our brothers and our sisters to us. That's a really important part. Whenever I see a leader who doesn't want to learn from anybody, he ain't a leader.
Exactly.
Whenever I sit down with the guy and all he does is tell me everything he knows and he never asks me a question, he's probably not a leader. He's probably somewhat insecure. But when I sit down with a guy who maybe, listen, I'll never forget this. I never forget it. Early mid-1980s, mid-86, 87, something like that. I was leading church planting projects west of the Mississippi for our Southern Baptist Convention Home Mission Board. So I was out in L.A. and I was doing a church planting conference for a group of church planters. And, Rick Warren in 86, I mean, he'd started in 81 or 82, something like that, maybe 83. But by that time, his church was 3,000 or 4,000 people, by all means, meeting in a big school, which was really unheard of in the mid-'80s like that, especially in California. Sure. So he was a big deal is what I'm saying, a huge deal. So I invited him. And not sure he would even come. And he responded, said he would like to come. So I want you to get this picture, all right? Here's Rick Warren. His church is several thousand people at this time. And here's a group of about 30 church planters, none of whom, have 100 people yet probably in their churches. And he shows up at the church where this meeting's going to be. He was going to speak around 11:30 or something like that, right before lunch. But the thing started at 9. He showed up before 9. And he hangs out with these church planters. Now, check this out. This is before iPads. He sits on the front row with a yellow pad, legal pad, and he listens to every presentation before him, and he takes notes. He's taking notes from guys whose churches are 30 and 40, and he wasn't doing it for show. I could tell he was a guy who always wanted to learn. I'm telling you, I learned something from that. I mean, I just... Guys who want to learn will learn. Guys who know they don't know everything will learn even more. But guys who think they've achieved something and they don't need help from anybody, those are the guys who are going to get into trouble.
Oh, that's so good. That's a great illustration. Fourth characteristic of the revitalization leaders who do well, who finish well, is they took care of their families. Listen, you've heard me say this before, but I won't say it again. We often decide that there are two opposing forces in our lives that demand our attention. One is church and one is family. That is not what the scripture says. The scripture says you are to minister to your family as the first line in your church. They are the first ones you minister to in the church. Paul said it well to Timothy, 1 Timothy 3:5, for if a man cannot manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church? They took care of their families. Sometimes I look and I think I did a decent job. Many times I look and I say, not so much. But here's one thing I'll tell you that's related to 3 and 4. 3 of the most common resources I go to when I need wisdom and advice are my 3 sons. And so I consider them some of the wisest men I've ever known. And I know they have Dad's best interest at heart. And you know what I also know? They aren't going to be shy to tell me if I am doing something stupid. In fact, I think they're going to be prone to tell me I'm doing something stupid. And so I made a lot of mistakes. I still make a lot of mistakes as a family man, even to this day. But we got to take care of our own families, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a lot of regrets in that regard. At the time you're doing it, you really believe perhaps you're doing the best you can. But when you look back on it, you see so many missed opportunities. So many times you should have done something different. And you didn't. And man, I just, but I'm grateful for God's grace and His ability to work through us. And my two boys are good shape and love the Lord and love their wives. But man, I wish, I'll be honest, man, I wish I could do it all over again. I would do it with a lot more intentionality. I'm not. I'm just being. I want to share this because I want younger men to hear it, because it is a heartache with me. There are times in my life when I was more intentional about discipling other young men even than discipling my children. And that's because, as a pastor, it's easier to disciple people who don't live in your house. Frankly, think about it.
Yes.
Satan really works on us to. When I was with Mark Halleck, and he's going to be on our new podcast, and I love what Mark said, because he's got some teenagers now. And he says, when they're 7 and 8, it seems natural going there and sit in their bedroom and sit on the edge of their bed, talk to them about the Lord, hug them and pray with them. When they're 17, it's kind of awkward. And this is what Mark said: lean into the awkward. Don't avoid it. Lean
That's
into
a great
it.
word.
And I'm thinking, yes, that's a great word. You got to, and that's what it was. Sometimes it seemed awkward to try to disciple my sons. We've been all together all day playing ball. It's like, this seems a little awkward just to stop and we're going to start, but you lean into that awkwardness. And he said, every time you lean into it, you feel better about it. That was a great word. So yes, just lean into the awkwardness with your family that you may feel, and pray with them and love them. And by the way, one of the best things you can do for your congregation is to model for them what it means to be a good dad, a good spouse, a good child to your own parents. As you deal with your family, you are modeling for them what Christ wants for each family. So, it's a win-win all around for sure.
Well, these are 4 good solutions. We'll offer a 5th, and we'll just make it brief for time's sake. They led with short-term wins. They saw places where the congregation could get behind something, and they said, let's do that. You've talked about that many times, Mark.
That's so important in revitalization. Don't eat the elephant all at once. Don't create some huge thing out there that unless we get this done, we're going to fail. Don't ever create win-lose scenarios. I learned that in fact, it may have been Rick Warren that I heard that from. Don't ever create a win-lose scenario. Everything is experiment. We're going to learn from everything. If it doesn't turn out the way we expected, God's still going to teach us something about ourselves, about Him, about the community. We're not wasting any of this. So don't create these situations where if we don't reach this, if we don't reach this amount of money or reach this many people or grow to this number, what happens when you don't do that? But find those small successes that you can find and celebrate those one small step at a time, and let God show you over time what one small step at a time can do. Again, just do not pass up the opportunity to celebrate the small, what seems on our end to be small successes, but they're really not. Every success that God brings to us is really amazing. But yes, just if you see one person growing closer to Christ, if you see one family being drawn closer together, if you see one man deciding that he's going to read his Bible a little bit more and be more interested in it, celebrate those things. Those are good, wonderful things. Don't just wait to celebrate only when you get another 100 in worship, or you're able to pay off a big debt or add a new building wing or something like that. No, celebrate everything God does in your ministry and in your life.
A great conclusion to a 3-part episode on leading a church revitalization, even when you don't feel like you're a leader. Go back and listen to part 1 of this, where we talk about why some revitalization leaders don't think they're leaders. Go back and listen to part 2, where we talk about 4 of the more common obstacles. And of course, we've tried to offer some solutions in this one. It's not an exhaustive list of 5 solutions for revitalizers and basically, what do we see in these revitalizers who have done well? Once again, go to the show notes, look at revitalizeandreplant.com so you can subscribe over there. Go to churchanswerspodcast.com to see information. But if you're a subscriber here, you'll still be there. One podcast is going to become 2. Revitalize and Replant. You'll need to subscribe there. Stay here if you're at Church Answers, and continue to hear from Thom and Mark multiplied now. You just gotta stay with us. Once again, thank you for being a part of Revitalize and Replant. It's been a quick early start to 2023. The month of January is already over. So we'll see you if you're listening to this when it's released. We'll hear from you when we come back in February with our next episode of Revitalize and Replant.